Welcome back to another episode of Inside Multifamily Access Control, brought to you by Salto. I'm here again with Colin. Colin, how you doing?
Hey, everybody. I'm doing well, thanks.
Yep. Colin's working remote today, which is nice to see. We got a different background. I appreciate it. So today we thought what we talk about is trends, especially now when you're seeing a lot of changes happen to us, and there were some changes in that were happening before, and they've been, escalated. We're going to talk a little bit about ones that we believe are actually going to stick, some that may be a fad or might just go away as things normalize a little bit. But so the whole idea here is to talk about access control trends and fads within the multifamily space. So let's kick it off with Colin. What are some of these trends or fads that you're seeing right now in multifamily?
Yeah, great topic, I think, right? Because this is the challenge of what is a trend, what is a fad, what's going to stick, what's not. So, I think there's a couple of easy ones directly as it relates to multifamily and access control, especially of self-guided touring. I think the pin pad, what is touchless? Everybody wants to be touchless, but what does that really mean? And what are the true, how touchless can you really be with access control in a building? So everything from auto door operators to pin pads and mobile credentials and all of that. What does that touchless experience become is a big one. Another interesting one that I think is kind of around new builds, and I call it high cost of living flight. So as this work remotely has become, and you've heard about people exiting New York City, you've heard about people exiting the Bay Area. What does that high cost of living flight look like for the multifamily development? Well, a lot of the multifamily projects have maintained and carried on. The new builds have slowed. There was a recent report I've seen that the new builds are down. So what does that mean? When you think of a 2 to 5 year build for a new multifamily development, what does that trend look like? Hopefully that's just a fad, right? And doesn't carry too much longer, but that's a huge impact. I think the last one is probably co-working or work from home, whatever you want to call that, of how do you adapt in unit working space to kind of common area working space, and how are we going to mix the residential living space with the working space in these new buildings or retrofit to accommodate that. I think those are interesting ones. And then just kind of my last comment on it, of you had mentioned some of this started before. I think a lot of these started before. We're now being forced to take maybe a 2-year or 3-year transition time frame, and we're trying to cram it into a 3-month transition with some of these trends. So I think there's a lot of interesting topics of trying to stay ahead of some of those curves.
Yeah, and I think that's why it's critical to have the conversation, because if no one has a crystal ball. I don't care if you call yourself a futurist or not. Like no one kind of knows. You see trends, right? And then you try to do an analyzation or whatever on top of these things in flight. So you're building the plan as it goes. Plus, though, it's interesting too, is because construction's not like one of these things that is known to be fast. So you put in the time that it takes just to build something as well. So even some of the selections that are being made in some of the new construction today, with the anticipation of needing this, is it going to be the reality? Kind of goes back to our first conversation about how to make a selection without worry. It's like, you're making all these decisions now, and in the end, maybe, when down the road, when we have not immunity, it's the vaccine, right? Like, are people going to be as worried, or as time? Because you see it even like at airports, you were mentioning, right? Like some of the stuff that goes on there, what we thought would be a fad has turned out to be something that lasts. But then there's also some things that I wouldn't call it a fad, but like, the need to take off your shoes and stuff like that, which, go up and down as you go from green to red or whatever the is. But anyway, so let's take a look at the ones sort of like timely now. So you mentioned touchless, which my opinion, and tell me what you think of this, is this is what we were calling frictionless before. Some people called it seamless. The rest, we saw it as an industry, as a convenience cool factor thing around digitizing keys. This idea that you can use your mobile phone to unlock the door and then go in. Now, as you know, and as you said, that was only one part of the touchless. There's the, you know, automatic door opening side, which hard to believe that every door, I know the end game is to be like the Jetsons where we walk up to the thing and it goes whoosh and you walk into it, but I don't think we're there yet. So there's an aspect of touching. Now, some doors will have the automatic opening, but I do believe this idea of using mobile credentials to sort of extend yourself and talk to the lock and it actuate. You may still have to grab the door handle, but it will accelerate because this desire of touchless. The frictionless side that we were doing before will be accelerated and adopted till, my opinion, there's a door problem we still have, which is the automatic door side, right? Not necessarily a lock problem, it's a door problem that we haven't necessarily addressed as an industry. But I do believe what will stick is the electronic digital side of that front end part of interaction. What are your thoughts on that?
I agree. And at the end of the day, this kind of goes back to our second conversation on that first podcast we did, the resident, right? And we can. It's really hard right now, I think, for manufacturers and integration companies and everybody to really understand how is that resident going to respond when the vaccine comes out. You know, what is that convenience versus cool versus health requirement aspect to it. And while there's no doubt, I think that frictionless side, that front end side will stay. How far that carries into the door problem you were just mentioning, I think still comes back to, we've got to make sure we're monitoring and listening to the residents over this next, 6-month, 9-month, 12-month period, whatever it is, and building towards that, right? If they're saying, hey, that front end experience isn't enough, then we've got to listen to that and solve that problem. But I do agree with you that the frictionless piece, the coolness piece, that adoption is going to speed up, almost become a requirement, and then that next half of the door piece, we'll have to kind of wait and see as to whether that. I think there's going to be some early adopters on some changes and stuff there, but I think a lot of that we won't know for a few months yet.
Yeah, and I also think it's if we separate, when we do these conversations, a lot of times in the industry, it's very broad, and we say, but if we apply it to the application, so I could see it actually happening quicker at the front door of the building, right, versus the tenant room itself, or like the shared areas, like the gym and the rest of the stuff, that it will have an actuator that it will open, and you could have this sort of frictionless experience from your car to the gate to the door to the elevator till you get to your unit. And at your unit, you may have to use the door handle at that point, and there may be this belief that, okay, that's a less, because most of the time someone that's grabbing is probably you anyway, so okay, then you go in and you wash your hands, versus the creepy door to the shared bathroom that is used in the facility that anyways probably should have been electrified a while ago anyway, so we're finally getting to that point. So those are the areas that I think touchless will happen quicker, and then we'll start to see it to where we get to the point where, like you said, yeah, I do think, in like a lot of things, that the areas that see this as a differentiator to market to make more money will do that. So when they could actually advertise 100% frictionless experience and touchless experience here, it's a much safer place here because you don't have to touch doors, and they'll put the extra money in there because they think they can get the extra income or sales or whatever it might be. So that's my belief on the touchless side of where we're at, and I think it will just push it even more farther. So I think it'd be good. All right, so second one that you brought was which I like this conversation because actually Saturday this week, we do this recording, by the way, on Monday. So for people to know, but on Saturday, I got a text from a good buddy of mine in the DC area that said, hey, we need to get together, grab some coffee. We're moving to Florida because he got the okay from his company to work from home, and they looked at the cost of living and the rest of it and said, it makes more sense for me to move down to Florida, and they could do it, which, makes you believe, and you hear all these stories that is real, and it's going to be an impact. So, what are some of your thoughts around what is that impact that's going to happen, and how do you believe we will see it in real life?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one that I would certainly I'll be the first to say, I don't have the answers to it. I think it's new enough that we're all still trying to learn and understand what that impact is going to be. Because I'm a personal believer that at some point people are going to want to go back to some level of office. Not everybody, certainly, but some people I know want to get back into offices and interact and drive innovation and some of that positive stuff. So um, I think there's a majority of truth to it, right? People are going to relocate for cost of living and things of that if they can work from remote or from anywhere. I think the big question that I have on it is, are they going to relocate and still rent? Are they going to relocate and buy? Is this going to change the purchasing type, right? I think we were starting to see a lot of people choosing to rent, and home ownership was not a critical life aspiration for some, which I think was really good for the multifamily piece. This work from anywhere may even be better. I think it'll be interesting to see what happens with kind of the traditional year-long lease versus a shorter-term lease. And just to take your friend who you mentioned is moving, are they going to move again in 8 months and say, hey, I want to see and work from anywhere? I
Yeah.
think that's an interesting dynamic that could come up.
Yeah, he mentioned that too. He said, like, this isn't, I'm going in this thinking this is good for right now, but not forever. And it makes you believe too. Like I started thinking about just going through this idea that, some of these national players that have facilities all over the place, like a Brookfield or an Avalon Bay or whomever, right? Where maybe that's a type where you buy in and you can actually one day be in Minnesota and decide that I'm going to go stay the night in Chicago, and then I'm going to spend a month in New York. And you know what I mean? Like, in this ability, that this sort of nomad living, if you would, and maybe there are people doing it already, and I'm missing I haven't seen it yet, but it does. So that at that point, what's interesting to me on this, so if we talk about how it can impact in a lot of ways, majority of the systems forever have been isolated, siloed systems on site. Now you need a multi-tenant type, with federated identity. You need to think through those use cases that, frankly, in our industry, a lot of those use cases haven't been built for multifamily, right? In some in the government, you see some of that stuff because of the federated identity and the multi-tenant, like, the DoD's got facilities everywhere. So you have these new use cases that we're going to have to address. And then how do the systems work, which is interesting to me because I go back to this idea that the locks forever have been built to be mechanical. Then they became motorized. Then there's a software use case that gets built, right? That then goes into. Now we're talking about locks that are purposely built with this software side and flexibility. And the companies, I know you all do it, and then there's a lot more people starting to talk about it. This idea about the flexibility of the systems, which then leads you to open protocols and like all this stuff, but right, like that comes into it. But the specifications of how these systems were specified for buildings are massively changing, and I really believe that the folks that are selling it, that can tell this narrative and the story, even though I think short term, I don't know if short term we're going to see as much of an impact from it, because there's a catch up of like, what does it even mean for a while, right? Like people are going to do, but then things will start to normalize, right? Like I think people will, like for instance, how people do schooling, like life will start to impact like schools and I don't know, like bad things like, you know, like right now it's great. I go down to Florida, my parents are there, they help, but life gets in the way of things and it impacts. But my belief is long term, I think it's real. I do agree with you. I think the areas where, you know, there's tax advantages, it's warmer out, you got family, um, you're going to see students maybe want to stay closer to home. Like I don't know, like all of those things will impact the ebbs and the flows of the product, but then it's also going to impact the use cases of how we build stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you just mentioned into the students, right? I mean, that's I think a whole nother conversation that you could have around kind of the purpose-built student housing and all of that sort of stuff, of moving around and taking classes here, taking classes there as online becomes a big deal. You know, young 18, 19 to 22, 23, 25-year-olds, giving them an opportunity, some often big time renters, the flexibility to go to school wherever they want, see the world wherever they want. I think all of that will have big impacts. So
yeah, totally agree. All right, so we mentioned those are two, I'd say they're the hot items of ones that you came up. I thought they're great. We mentioned the other ones, new building slowing. I think there's some obvious impacts there. And I agree with you. I think the retrofit and aftermarket is going to be huge for the short term because you've got existing builds that have to do some stuff that will accelerate budgets that maybe they didn't think before, but now it's health concerns. So you kind of you can't say, we'll get to the cool stuff later. No, it's health concerns that you're going to do it now. What do you think about that?
I 100% agree. Again, that's what we talk about at Salto quite a bit, is we've seen that trend coming, right? Especially the mobile credential trend and some of that stuff coming. But when it's a coolness factor and a want to have, that typically takes, 2 years, 3 years before it becomes kind of the norm, right? But we're talking about that having to, not just mobile credentials, but things in general. It's no longer a cool want to have, it's a need to have, which is pushing that norm up to 3 months, 4 months, whatever it is. And you're also seeing that as that's no longer kind of a differentiator between class B or class C buildings to the class A or A plus buildings, because at that point it was just a feature, right? And so if you wanted that feature, you need to stay in one of our better properties, or that's not the case anymore, right? It's not a feature, it's a requirement, it's a life safety piece. It can't just be a separator from class B to class C to class A. It's got to be throughout. So
yeah, it's a horizontal trend that will stick. It will be now part of our lexicon as an industry. When we go to ISC West again and the rest, there's always going to, the new message is going to be this whole green, green. That was the old one a long time ago. Then it went mobile and cloud. Now we're going to be talking about health for quite a while. So absolutely. All right. I think we covered three good trends and topics. Hopefully we'll continue to have this conversation online. We'll continue to also, in the newsletter, we'll write about it and talk about it. It's not one that's going to go away for a while. That's always what's fun about these. We didn't make any necessarily predictions, but I do believe that these are things that are here to stick, and it's going to be fun to watch what happens. So, Colin, as always, appreciate the opportunity to do this with you, and I enjoy it. So look forward to next week.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Take care.